everyone. Good afternoon from Cambridge. Good morning from some other part of the world, and good middle of the night for those of you who are brave. It's exciting to see the participant list. It's very distracting for me because I see some former students, former colleagues, and a lot of friends. So thank you for joining us. We have a big group who registered for today, and a big group coming in already. So I'm Sarah Whiting. I think you all know I'm your dean. This is the sixth of our annual virtual town halls that we've been running. And I want to thank our development and alumni relations team, particularly Lindsay LaGrasse and Ariella Ruth Goldberg, who have created this amazing platform that shares information, creates a community with all of you that I think is quite remarkable. And so let's dive in. I'll give you a very brief update because really we want to get into the meat of today's event. So brief update, the GSD is doing really well. All of our international students were able to come and attend after a summer of intense planning on our part. We were very happy that our planning for contingencies was not necessary. And so we have an amazing cohort of students. The trays, we're in the fourth week, I think, already of our new semester, which is sort of mind-boggling to me. And we have amazing work already happening in the trays and some really great students right now. I think in terms of Harvard in the world, I encourage you to keep abreast of all the news as it hits the newspapers because things change all the time. The latest update is that the Department of Justice is suing Harvard over admissions records. So there's always something to be paying attention to. But I think you all received Alan Garber's letter from January 29th. And I have to say that he is really the president for this moment. He has been remarkable in terms of holding lines, acknowledging realities, and really working with a very difficult situation. So if you didn't read that letter, I encourage you to make sure you do so. That was an email from January 29th to all alumni, where he lays out the importance of a strong foundation, which I thought was a great design argument as a header, then a critical moment and a widening reach. Three platforms that the school definitely ascribes to. And so, again, it's really a remarkable, challenging moment, but we have incredible leadership. I encourage you also to look at our spring programs, our public programs. We started off already last night with a fantastic lecture for the architecture department. And we are launching right into our public program. So if you go to our website, and I hope you enjoy our new website, you will see everything that's on there, and our programs are always streamed, and so you can join all of those. So I'm going to jump into just housekeeping practicalities. So this event is being recorded. The video will be shared on the GSD's YouTube channel soon in the next coming weeks. There's closed captioning in English available if you hit the CC button in Zoom, which most of you know by now. That allows for AI-generated captions, which can sometimes be quite entertaining. If you have questions, this is the most important point. If you have questions during the presentations and the panel discussion, please put them in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen rather than the chat. Though we encourage the chat for essentially, as I have characterized it, passing notes in class. And so you all should feel free to do that. So today's session is understanding sort of the role of technology right now in the school and some of the amazing opportunities that we have with changing technologies and how the school stays abreast of that. We have three amazing speakers to join us in this, starting with Martin Bechthold, who's our academic dean, foremost, I would say, because that's how I am very grateful to him for devoting a lot of his time to helping with the administration of the school. in an extraordinary way. He's the Kumagai Professor of Architectural Technology. He's also the head of the Advanced Studies program here, which is the program that includes the Master of Design Engineering and the Master of Design Studies. He is the founding co-director of the Master in Design Engineering, which is our program that crosses the GSD and Cs, or bridges, I should say, to use a better adjective. He's the founder of the GSD's Design Robotics Group, as well as the Material Processes and Systems Group, and has done pioneering research on low-carbon material systems and architectural ceramics, authoring several books. He holds several material innovation patents. We're also joined by Eric Rodenbeck, who is a visiting faculty member. He's a lecturer in architecture. He's teaching right now an open project, which is a collective project that we have as part of the MDes curriculum. His is called Reimagining the Archive. Eric is the founder of Stamen Design, which is a studio that does really extraordinary work that combines sophisticated mapping and data visualization for clients who range from the Dalai Lama to the WHO. So I'm envious. He has an amazing client base. He also has had exhibitions at the Venice Biennale, the V&A, SF MoMA, the Art Institute of Chicago, among other institutions. So he has a very interesting intellectual background, which combines science fiction and the history of technology, and that feeds his work, his approach to visualization and storytelling. And we're very lucky to have him here on our faculty. It's the second time he's teaching with us. And then Humbi Song, who received her MArch. Actually, she's a hat trick. So Humbi got her bachelor degree in 2013. She got her MArch from the GSD and her DDes from the GSD. She is also a visiting faculty member, instructor in architecture. She is teaching a course this semester called AI in the Physical Imaginary. I was talking to both of them before this started, and I noted that I need to just start taking some of our classes, because it seems like our students have a really great opportunity, and I want that too. Humbi researches human AI co-creation and participatory design, looking at how generative AI and robotic fabrication and interactive tools can expand who designs, who builds, and increase accessibility to making, reshaping relationships between designs, communities, and machines. So 3 really innovative teachers and practitioners. What the format will be that they will give short presentations. We'll have a small discussion among the group of us, and then we'll open it up to all of you. So you all should pay attention and be prepared to ask intelligent questions. I'm going to turn things over to Martin Bechthold to start us off. Thank you.
Great. So I'll thanks for the introduction, Sarah. And you all heard, it's great to see so many of you on the call. You heard the call for intelligent questions. There's a lot of pressure. I'm sure that's going to be just fine. I'll share my slides. So I took my mission today to be providing kind of overview mapping of a kind of a snapshot of the GSD in terms of technology. I'll weave in a little bit of my own work, but that's not the emphasis. Just as a reminder, we do have a mission. It is at the bottom of your screen: resiliency, justice, and beauty. And I mapped this onto a few other sort of themes which I want to explore. One is sustainability, and the other, I'll call it broadly, quality of life. These are obviously related, but I'm thinking of quality of life as more directed, the kind of human condition in the built environment. Now, across from these 2 themes are methods. One first to gear towards developing understanding, then developing future scenarios and models. And that, of course, being the GSD, it always is always about beauty at the end of the day. So I'll start with understanding, just showing you a few things that have been going on. And I'll start with a sort of project that relies on a similar technology as my very last slide. So that's sort of the bookmarks of my talk. if you wish. So this is a collaborative project involving Charles one time and Eric, who's on the call, as well as a number of other folks who basically to develop a workflow to digitize the archive of photographer Rusha and using machine learning, develop a kind of machinic vision and architectural DNA of an LA street. So this is a kind of developing a new kind of understanding based on machine learning. And you'll see at the very end how that then translates into work of students in studio. Cheryl Shrestava, colleague teaching a class at the GSD, is taking a different approach to methods of understanding. She's teaching students methods to kind of assess quantitatively the environment that we live in a variety of ways, going from a kind of physical phenomena, and then from there going to the sort of what these phenomena might, how they might impact human perception. So that's sort of work that we now actually offer our students routinely in electives. This includes the urban scale here, as you can recall. This is the Science Center Plaza. So students can develop ways of mapping where people walk, what spaces they occupy, which means that eventually, based on interventions, we might be able to develop predictions as to how they might behave as we intervene in these kind of spaces. But emphasis in that course was on developing an understanding, kind of analytical capacities. My own group, we've done some work on beauty. We have an ongoing project called Is Beauty in the Eye of the Beholder? And maybe appropriately, that project uses eye tracking to understand what people look at if we're asking them about beauty versus asking them about practicality of a space. This is actually work in progress, which we're very excited about. We're finding a lot of differences. So again, a different angle on understanding the sort of built environment. So that's my sort of short excursion into the quality of life. I'll go into sustainability quite a bit there. I'll start with an MDE student project. This is came out of the second semester studio in the MDE program, which Sarah mentioned. It looks at the problem of fast fashion, the fact that a lot of fashion gets discarded very quickly. There's a large amount of used clothing, and the students develop an AI-powered platform to configure outfits that might be stylish and essentially lower the threshold for these second-hand clothing to be reused, and thus extending their lifespan. So again, it's about sustainability, but from a very particular personal angle. This is very different work that was done in my group. We looked at measuring in real time the 3D printing of soft materials, and then using a machine learning model to correct the printing path in real time in response to the deformations of that material, and also to predict whether a geometry is printable or not, involving a fairly complicated setup of scanning and sort of a computational setup. What this does is it allows us to kind of print things that otherwise would be unprintable. And maybe most importantly, it allows us to print with materials that have not been highly processed, because processing of materials is one of the larger impacts that the construction industry has on carbon emission. So this opens up an opportunity to use materials that are actually normally not particularly practical for construction, that have unpredictable behaviors. So one of those materials is a new algae material we've been developing based on algae grown in a wastewater treatment plant process. And if you look at the US, just in a fairly conservative way, we could potentially sequester 2 million tons of CO2 again, without competing actually with any kind of land or water-based resources. This is about wastewater treatment and cleaning services there. So Dan Tisch, who's been advancing this project here, has been working on this for some time, producing prototypes of building blocks. The strength here is roughly the same as wood in compression, so these are actually usable blocks. So here's an idea of how to actually use building to sequester carbon and ideally keep it in the building for 20, 30, 50 years as a way to kind of move the needle on carbon. Now, this involves collaboration with scientists. We have a long-standing relationship with material scientists at the engineering school. And we took that collaboration to the classroom. We have a number of classes now taught by Dan Tisch, but also Jonathan Grinham, where students actually go and work in the science labs to kind of experience the kind of challenge and beauty of bridging science and design in this new and exciting space of biofabrication that I think is one of the futures of materials. Switching scales, but staying sort of within natural system. This is work in the landscape department by our colleague Karen Lee Barsinai, who's looking at the fact that beavers can have an incredibly positive impact on ecologies, but that impact is usually fairly limited in scale. And she's asking, can we actually produce a sort of robotic versions of beavers? And that sort of is interesting, and she's taking that research to the MLA3 core studio, where here is a landscape that requires an ecological intervention suitable for what beavers do, but this will be far beyond the scale of what the animals can do. So she's looking at the computational and robotics ways to kind of replicating the sort of behavior that beavers can have and the positive impact that that behavior impacts on a landscape. So here's a kind of combination of the research going to the classroom, to the studio, in this case in the MLA program. So staying a little bit again in nature, looking at a very different project. This came out of a course project by Mary Farah, which then translated into her MArch-1 thesis, and now it's become a project in Jonathan Grinham's group. So they're basically 3D printing the interstitial space between rocks that are unprocessed, with the idea that we could actually produce construction walls, load-bearing structures using that technology. We could scan, we could automate the generation of the true path, we can fill in the stitches and basically produce usable structural materials based on normally discarded waste that happens in the quarries. And this is actually quarried stone from a nearby quarry in Plymouth in the States. So here's Maddie and Ming, doctoral student, in the lab working with robots and actually doing the prototypes. So it's a different angle, and same group. They're looking at the incredibly wasteful wool industry. There's about 50% of wool that is harvested is actually not used, is really discarded for a variety of reasons. And they developed a way of producing panels using those waste products, using this sort of waste that you're seeing right here, panels that might be suitable for cladding, for interiors. They've done some testing here on fire resistance. They have sort of other testing in the pipeline. It's another example, in this case, how material technology and material science and design can work together to advance agendas of sustainability. So this is really a kind of project about limiting the life cycle impact of wool and extending the sort of lifespan of this product, connecting industries that are normally completely discrete and completely separate. Last but not least, in the sustainability sort of segment of my few slides here, I want to just highlight the effort that our colleague Ali Malkawi is investing in the Center for Green Cities and Buildings. As you probably know, this is a kind of living lab, a building that learns. Is a physical building that has a digital twin. That twin is powered by an intelligent AI-powered system that learns from the building operation, including its occupants. It takes in environmental data such as temperature, wind, pollution. It takes in a lot of interior sensing data, and it develops a kind of behavior that is over the time is sort of teaching that building to be even more efficient and be so healthier. I think it's a very innovative approach. Among other things, it does also produce large data sets, which we are actually missing in our industry. If we're interested in moving the needle on carbon and using machine learning, then doing some of that work, we actually don't really have a lot of data. So that's already been published. They also have a way of detecting problems in the system. So there's a kind of fault detection, which actually has been patented. So this is very technical work. The AI system was custom built by the team. So just showing a kind of range of approaches from materials to analytics to a kind of occupational project on buildings. So, oops, quality of life actually. Sorry. Here, I'm going to start off with a project by MDE students who noticed a challenge in terms of having patients that have limited English capacity to access medical services. They developed a physical device and a related software platform to provide customized, specific medical translation services in real time. Here for folks, they won any number of awards, among them IF Gold Award, which is a really a tough award. They also won an HBS Venture Competition Award. So this is currently in a kind of startup phase. Came out of a studio project, went into the second year IDEP project, and is now out there and hopefully creating impact for patients on the ground. They work with doctors. They're bringing in stakeholders that normally would not have been sort of a core constituency of the school. Similarly, MDE students in the sort of quality of life space developed a system, a SOC, a soul, that is essentially sensing certain disabilities, called foot drop, sensing them, and then producing data that allows actuators to help those people affected by the disability to walk better. So this is, again, a way of using AI to directly help students, to help patients. This is really a kind of short loop AI project whereby the data is immediately fed into a kind of actuator system, but it does involve learning. So it's a sort of smart next generation medical device. Again, this also is now in a kind of next development stage in the second year MDE IDEP project. Some of my work in this area involves essentially beauty. So we're doing some work to understand how building occupants perceive materials, and we're trying to see if we can actually predict what materials will be appreciated in what way, and then secondly, how will these perceptions of materials impact our appraisal of spaces. We tend to not focus on materials when we look at spaces, but actually materials do have an impact on how we perceive and how we probably behave in spaces. This is ongoing work that involves a lot of survey work and then statistical analysis and some machine learning to understand if this is predictable. Jumping scales, again, this is analytical work coming out of the urban design program, both in the pre-term workshop and in a seminar offered by Sarah Page. On the left, you're seeing connected to sort of materials and the previous set of slides, a way to correlate the roof materials with urban heat islands. So now, while that correlation is not necessarily new, the fact that our students can do this now in the classroom, even in a pre-term workshop, I think is remarkable. It's a testimony to the degree that these technologies are pretty accessible now to kind of broad range of stakeholders. On the right-hand side, kind of similar set of tools, but looking at correlations between employment, rent, and transportation. So as you know, of course, the school has so many different dimensions, working on the human scale, working on the city and regional scale, and all of that. So it still happens under the broader rubric of technology. So I want to spend my last set of slides on the sort of modeling, on the idea of the kind of futures. And so I actually did a little survey, both of the colleagues and the students, because when we talk about emerging technologies such as AI, it seemed useful to simply know where we stand at the school. So it took some time to take stock. So looking at coursework, about a quarter of the colleagues have an active interest in sort of active policies and technologies that are using in the classroom that are directly related to AI. Only very few are sort of adamantly opposed and sort of are not allowing that. For the most part, there's an openness to experiment. Same is true in the studio environment, a little bit less so, but still there's definitely a lot of interest. On the side of the students, we asked them a number of questions, and it seems that the majority of students are using AI more so in coursework than in studio, but there's also definitely a group that is not interested at this point and is sort of resisting that technology for the time being. So it gives you sort of a snapshot of where the school stands in terms of coursework offered by colleagues and students. So I'll show you a couple of things on the modeling side. So one of the interesting developments has been, as you probably know, the ability to vibe code, which means we don't have to write the code, or we can ask an AI tool to help us write the code, and we can then just check the tool. So Dan and Min co-published a paper where they looked at the opportunities and limitations of that process of vibe coding. So Min, teaching in landscape, looked at the kind of analysis of landforms that is sort of really expanding sort of how we can understand landforms in a dynamic way over time as a modeling approach. And Dan took the sort of similar approach of vibe coding to a kind of multi-optimization of components that combine thermal and structural aspects in this single workflow. Again, they're designed by a kind of interaction with an AI agent. Dan also teaches a class on digital fabrication. In this case, he's a student project that is very exploratory, going from a kind of generation using AI of a 2D image of a kind of dynamic image that you see on the left. From there, the students took this into a number of steps, an integrated workflow that ultimately led them to a 3D model that they then built. So I think we have the ability to have students explore what can we do with current workflows. I think we'll see more of that about this from Humbi shortly. I think this is work that probably relates to some of the things that she'll be showing you. We also have a series of studios that are dedicated to exploring with students what it might mean to use AI as a designer. So in this case, we have Scott Cohn, who's from the Department of Architecture, working with Panagiotis Mikalatos, who's an expert in computation. The student was located in London. This happened to also be a studio that was jointly offered with the MRE program. So here's work by Gary, one of the students. What she did is kind of assemble a data set and train a custom machine learning model with a data set from London facades, and then generate a kind of generalized facade from the training set that she was then able to apply to her project, to a part of the project, and to kind of reflect on sort of what this means now to build in an existing context. We have a way of computationally recording that context, much in the way that Charles and Eric did in the very first project that I showed you. In this case, there was actually a custom computational tool built for the studio that was made available to the students that they were able to use without having to go deep into coding. So these technologies really get to be quite accessible at that time. Another project from the same studio, and that's going to be my last couple of slides, is Kelvin Hu, where she did something a little bit different. His data set was the London townhouses, and they trained the model to generate a facade of a high-rise. So he sort of made a whole leap in scale and typology, and producing the kind of design that I think it definitely has merit, is interesting. And I think one thing we find, of course, there's always lots of versions that are getting produced in these kind of experimental approaches. But so I wrap up by saying that the studio is become a kind of laboratory where we're exploring with students what some of these emerging technologies might mean for design, and that journey certainly is continuing very much. And with that, I'll wrap it up here and hand this to my colleague. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. A terrific overview and concentration of all the stuff that's going on here, which is remarkable. And we're going to turn it over to Eric now. Eric, go ahead.
Thanks, Martin. Thanks, Sarah. I'm going to share my screen because I know how to do that. Okay. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for having me at the school. It's really a thrill. I'm really just stunned walking around. It's wonderful. My background is in mapping and data visualization. I run a design studio called Stamen in California. And I'm also a lecturer now at the Graduate School of Design. So I'd like to talk a bit about some work that we're doing in the class. This is the second year that I'm teaching this workshop. It's called Reimagining the Archive. And I'd like to talk about where that class is going and then how that connects to the work of data visualization that we focus on at Stamen. I'm discovering that there's a lot of overlap. So the course is called Reimagining the Archive. It's twice a week. We are working in partnership with MoMA, the Institute of Black Imagination, the American Museum of Natural History, and Harvard Art Museums on making projects that are involved in those archives that we're trying to create new kinds of knowledge and new kinds of tools for interfacing with these archives, some of which are digital and some of which are not. Last year, we had a really fun experience with MoMA. We are using a variety of tools, and I can talk about our attitude towards that in a minute. But this is a project that lets you browse through MoMA's archives with a virtual blue crate and lets you adjust the size of that crate and load up new artworks as a result. And then the kind of course, the third dimension of it is important so that you can compare artworks that are the same size. A kind of playful and I think elegant way to start to explore the collection in a way that a curator never would. We discovered that all the small paintings in MoMA are all miniature portraits of human beings, which is something that we would not have discovered otherwise. When it comes to AI, we are very open about using it, and we're using it in such a way that it's the one rule is that you can't lie about it. So if you're going to use it, you need to be clear about it, and we want to know what your prompts are. And this project was about the prompts. This is Roy Jiang. Roy asked the same question of ChatGPT over and over and over and over again and tracked the results, so revealing a landscape of the kinds of answers that AI can give, or at least that ChatGPT can give. The first thing he did was he generated 20 keywords describing a photo that was in MoMA, got a list, and then he got another 20, and then another 20, and another 20. And then by hand, he went in and connected the words that have similar meanings. And so you can see here in the beginning, the step 1 and 2, there's a lot of variation between the two queries. When we get down to step number 8 and step number 7, you can see there's a huge amount of overlap in between the responses. So what Roy is really doing is he's not just using AI to make pretty pictures. He's using it to investigate its own landscape of knowledge and asking not just one question and accepting the answer, but interrogating the act of asking questions. Roy did a lot of work like this over the semester. So we are working with a couple of different institutions this year. I've been lucky enough to get invited to work with the Rare Pigment Collection at Harvard's Graduate School of Design. It's a really remarkable collection, not Graduate School of Design, Harvard Art Museums. It's not, if you go into the Harvard Art Museum, you'll see it on the 4th floor. It's pretty inaccessible, but it's tantalizing. They have a lot of stuff. It's a really marvelous archive. It's sourced throughout history. Each one of them has their own story, and we're investigating this archive as we speak. It's full of surprises and strange things. This is Indian yellow, which is made from the fermented urine of Indian cows that have only ever been given mango leaves to eat. It's a fugitive color because you can't make it anymore. It's animal rights problems. It's not good for the cows. But I just love the idea of like a forbidden ink, or an ink that you can't find out about how it was made anymore. It's housed in this incredible cabinet, and we're going to be documenting that cabinet when I get back to Harvard in a couple of weeks. They have thousands of blacks, and it's really just remarkable to consider the different kinds that they have. There's condensed smoke, carbon black, blue black, iron. They also have a black called Vanta black, which was acquired, the rights to which were acquired by Anish Kapoor, who's a really well-known blue chip artist. It absorbs 99.9% of all visible light. So you can see there that it's printed on a sheet of tinfoil, and where the black is, you see none of the shadows, none of the glints. It's a total black. The only thing that the thing about that we found really intriguing is that Anish Kapoor is the only one who's allowed to use this black. He entered into an agreement with the company that said that they would not allow anybody else to use it for artistic purposes, which really got under Stuart Semple's skin. And he made a kind of ink that's the pinkest pink that there is. And if you want to buy it, you have to sign an affidavit that says that you won't allow Anish Kapoor to use this ink. So there's a kind of materiality here that I find really intriguing, and also the kind of embedding of these pigments into the world of code. It makes me think about open source and the kind of licensing of different tools, and sort of it really just called this whole incident called really attention to the materiality of ink and how and pigments and how they connect with larger systems. Kind of alongside that, I've been investigating my own pigment practice. I'm interested in inks that aren't locked down, that are made with natural processes. Every time I paint my room, I've always got to open all the windows because it's toxic. But it turns out if you make inks with honey, the bees will come and play with you. So this relates to my practice of data visualization in a way that I've just started to realize. This is a project called Cab Spotting that we made with the Exploratorium here in San Francisco. It was made during a time when GPS signals in taxi cabs was novel enough that it seems to have inspired Uber, at least in some way. An image from this was on the front page of Uber's first pitch deck. And what it is this is the aggregated GPS positions of yellow cab taxis in San Francisco. You can see they're much more on the right than on the left, or so I should say on the east side and the west side, and they kind of trail out as they go to the west. They can be quite lovely. The thing that I want to call our attention to is the differences between the freeways, which are quite elegant and smooth, and you can see there's a one-to-one relationship between the freeway and the road. And then there are some places where there are gaps. Those are largely parking lots and car washes and things like that. On the upper right there, you can see the taxi stand where they go at the end of their shift, right next to a really elegantly traced freeway. The traces of taxis wind up being in some ways a proxies for the environment and for other things. If we look downtown here, we can see that the traces are not at all very closely related to the streets that are very clearly underneath them, demarcated in that grid. They're really they're bouncy and mushy and all over the place. And I think there was an impulse initially to try and to correct this, to make it more of a map of the streets in the city. Resisting that impulse led us to do some thinking and some looking and some reading. And it turns out that there's a direct correlation between the fuzziness of the taxi cabs traces and the heights of the buildings that are around them. The GPS signals bounce around in the skyscrapers. And so I've started to just really think about this idea and love this idea that the visualization is not just a representation of a kind of strict form of reality, but a representation of the trace and a kind of love for the trace. Many years later, in talking with Dietmar Offenhuber at Northeastern, a friend and who's going to be talking at our class, he outlined to me that the reason that the buildings are tall is because the bedrock is close to the surface in those places. And so this idea seems almost impossibly beautiful to me, that a blurriness of taxi cab traces in a built environment is a direct proxy for the nearness of the bedrock to the surface. And so I'm trying to sort of think about all these things together as a kind of these data visualizations, these inks, these AI processes that don't hide the fact of their own making, but call attention to them. And that's what we're doing in the class. So I encourage you to reach out to me if you know anything about materials and ink or data visualization. I'm easy to find. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you, Eric. Excellent. Really appreciate it. And we will come back to you with our Q&A. And Humbi, it's yours now. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Let me screen share. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for having me and for the invitation. And thank you, everyone, for joining for this virtual town hall. So there you go. I've been around the GSD building for a long time, even as a college student, not studying architecture at all, so I was studying social studies. I started to really investigate or become curious about the way the built environment is impacting social behavior, interactions with each other. And along the way, I became focused on thinking about technology as one of the mediators of that kind of interaction between us, among each other, other humans, and also with the built environment. And so I'm today especially going to be talking about the class I'm teaching at GSD called AI and the Physical Imaginary. And I generally, overall, frame my work in two ways. So I investigate emerging technologies in architecture. So first, computation embedded into the built environment, experienced by the body. So that might be like sensors, actuators, sensing people, climate, temperature, and reacting in maybe a kinetic kind of way or other responsive ways. And also the computational tools of design used by the body to design the built environment. And so regarding the second topic, I'm especially interested in asking what are the explicit, but maybe more importantly, the invisible ways that tools are impacting the ways we design. And so when I'm talking about tools, can refer to a lot of things, but including these things. So digital fabrication, software, Rhino versus Blender, animation, 3D scanning, AR, VR, simulations, and then, of course, the topic of today, generative AI tools. And so what is happening right now? So, as you can see, there has been an explosion of AI tools and very interesting ways of using them in the field of design. A lot of the powerfulness of the tools has also been connected to the increase in accessibility, the popularity, the fact that anyone can just go to a browser and go access these tools. And so I actually want to address maybe one other side, maybe a bit more problematic side that I'm observing with the popularized use of generative AI tools. And so to give an example, I took this photo. It's a screenshot from Instagram searching the hashtag AI architecture. And ostensibly, when you do that, you're supposed to get a really messy amalgamation of posts from everywhere all over the world. But there's something funny going on in which you sort of see these visual cliches occurring even though the individual posters might be coming from all over the globe. And so I've been starting to identify some of these potential problems related to the use of generative AI, especially for image making. And something that I see in teaching with students, working with students, where sometimes, they might be kind of falling into the rabbit hole of visual cliches. It also can contribute to issues like illusion of knowledge. And as I was mentioning, there's this very strange, pretty problematic erasure of individual diversity of perspectives, almost like you start seeing the mid-journey stylistic elements rather than the amazing individual perspectives and backgrounds. Also, of course, the flattening of materiality, the three-dimensionality, and then lastly, this issue of design fixation, which is something that happens because I believe the way a lot of UI design of these tools assume that it works in a very A to B kind of way. And so you immediately get a solution, even if you put in a really hazy idea. And when you see the design solution, it can really be difficult to think of alternate solutions because you just were confronted with something that looks a little sensible. But the problem is, it doesn't feel like it has your designer authorship. Like there's a lot of issues where your design process gets fixed right at the beginning. And so instead of trying to refer to this very typical way of using generative AI tools like give me the answer. I'm trying to call back to a larger lineage of computational tools in design and architecture. So for instance, Nicholas Negroponte, same with Hepburn, might think of computation as tools to think with, not tools to deploy. And so is there a way we can think of generative AI in that kind of sense, something to think with? And so because of this, I've been developing a theoretical framework to help us categorize what are the different paradigms or different models of human AI interaction in the design process. And so the direct one might be kind of like how you typically use something like Midjourney, DALL-E, Stable Diffusion. There's an input A, it could be pretty hazy, but then you get out output B, which is the ultimate solution. That's where you run into issues like design fixation, etc. And so, they generate kind of interesting images, kind of like beautiful provocations, a little bit uncanny. I think they can open up really interesting questions about, what it is a sketch in the first place. Like maybe now it's not just like the pencil scribble. You can make these kind of uncanny, ghostly model photos. All of this is interesting, but because my true interest is in thinking of these tools as something to think with, I've been actually mostly focusing on, and that's what I'm doing with this class right now, on these real-time tools of design. And so one such student from GSD just a couple of weeks ago was creating this sort of a marker board setup with a projector down where they can sketch, and then there's real-time generative AI image overlay that gives them like slight alterations, slight thickening, this implication of three-dimensionality. And so to give other examples of prior student work that I've worked with before, here's a student who's using real-time AI tool just with random scrap cardboard material lying around her studio, and she's using this to mock up a small furniture piece. And what's happening here, and what I think is really different from the way, Midjourney, etc., works, is that she's leveraging her own disciplinary knowledge about how things come together. She can assemble physical models. And so there's a lot more information going into, the input A than what is like the typical UI model. And so she used this process to create this sort of transformable bench chair that transforms to a bench. Refers to sort of the sort of like cyclical nature of working with generative AI. Other such examples. So one of my students downloaded from McMaster this door handle and is using that to generate very initial brainstormy provocations about kind of like a hallway design space. So these are some of the screenshots. Another GSC student working with, again, similar kind of real-time AI tool. All of this originated from my own interest in trying to use this sort of different method of human AI interaction, this kind of real time, in which I was using a VR headset to design in real scale, full scale. So this is like very initial jewelry scale experiments. Left is what I see through my headset, and then right is a generative AI outputs. And there's this sort of immediate feedback loop going on in which interesting ideas that I see from generative AI gets incorporated, or otherwise, I let that go. And in that sense, I can kind of steer the wheels, have a little bit of a greater degree of control. And I happen to have an opportunity to use a piece of marble that I discarded from a quarry. And so I use that as an opportunity to physicalize this process into something three-dimensional. And so initially this is, work with sculpture scale, but in this class, especially through the rest of this term, we're going to be using this to apply to a bit more like architectural detail scale mock-ups. Try to use these real-time tools to get to some sort of three-dimensional physical outcome that is really leveraging your own disciplinary knowledge. And so with that in mind, work that I've been doing at GSD with some colleagues here have been also trying to design alternate tools of design. So instead of going to the AI tool like Midjourney DALL-E directly, what if you could just continue to work in Blender or Rhino or the 3D modeling software you're already comfortable with, but there's this different kind of plugin feature. In this particular tool, there's an emphasis on trying to facilitate a really iterative kind of workflow, an ability to go back to, let's say, like step 3, step 7, and essentially, so your design process isn't just A to B, but there's a lot of checkpoints and a lot of branching out, and you're able to refer back to it. And then this refers back to actually a very early project I did. So this is pre-AI, but regarding generative 3D printing, in which I was trying to imagine, 3D printers are not knowledgeable about how humans might think about what architectural columns are, or like there are certain disciplinary things that we have come to know, but when we give certain instructions to computational tools, suddenly that information has all gone away. And so this is a project that was trying to, so I hacked the 3D printer to kind of randomly generate out different combinations of info, support, etc., depending on its mood. And then from there on, developed this kind of series of building blocks, even series of sort of like storylines or vignettes of what might be happening inside these buildings. And then lastly, I'm going to show a little bit of how this also then becomes student projects at a bit of a pavilion scale, where people can use interactive technologies that, there you go, that make building components respond to people. So like they expand, contract, change in some sort of way. Maybe there's a kind of an inflation. And so in that sense, there's also this element of trying to think about using responsive interactive technologies or generative AI experienced by the body, by the occupants. And so this is some of the prior work I've done with students, which I'm also hoping to realize through this course by next 2-3 months. And so maybe I'm just going to end with this concept, embodied cognition, which is central to how I think about what I want the students to walk away with, which is that interacting with tools changes the way we think and perceive. We think with our bodies, not just with our minds. We know more by doing than by seeing. And there are times when we're literally thinking with things. And I really want them to be thinking about this as they use technology. Thank you.
Okay. I want to invite Eric and Martin to join Humbi and me to have a conversation, but I have to say I'm blown away. I love this opportunity for myself to see some of the breadth of what we're doing here at the GSD. And I hope you all noted that Humbi went from Instagram to a block of marble. It's a sort of extraordinary breadth there. I'm going to respond to a couple of the questions that are en route, and I want to give a reminder that people should be submitting questions through the Q&A, not the chat, if you don't mind. But we're going to start chatting among ourselves first, and cognizant of the fact that this session is called Technology, Design, and Pedagogy, I want to maybe take some of the questions from the chat and my own questions to talk really directly about these challenges of pedagogy at this moment, given these tools, right? And so, David Greenhall's question, which starts us off in the chat, is saying, well, at a certain point, can't you be an architect where all you're doing is speaking to machines? You no longer, the implication of his question is you no longer have to teach the tools of design and the fundamentals of design. I would obviously differ, but I'm curious to hear how you all understand this sort of like the furthest reach of how technology can take over some of our work, which is of course the anxiety all over the world of AI. And with that, I think acknowledging that there's a constant theme of, well, we have to be the intelligence to feed in the right inputs and to judge the right outputs, but the anxiety of, will AI and technology get to a point where it's also making such judgment calls? And if you've listened to the podcast, The Last Invention, you'll know why I'm nervous. But I want to get to this issue of sort of like, what do we teach now? What technology do we need students to know? What do we expect them to come in with? What do we need them to know in order to run with this new age?
Well, let me start with a couple of thoughts. So obviously the technologies are evolving so fast, the models get better. So the industry is moving ahead at light speed, and we're finding ourselves confronted with a sort of constantly changing and evolving landscapes of tools. I think you ask 10 different people at the school, you get probably 10 different answers. That is also one of the amazing qualities of the school. In my own work, I'm seeing what I'm teaching. Part of it involves a lot of analysis, and I think actually I see the power of some of the approaches, but I still see the necessity of being able to evaluate, as we always do. Let's say even in simulations, we have to have a kind of understanding of what is to be expected in terms of an outcome of an analysis of a simulation, so it doesn't eliminate the need to actually teach those fundamentals. So, But I think the sort of activity of the designer might well be changing to having a kind of constant intelligent assistant by our side, and that changes how we work. That's sort of how I experience the interaction with AI in my own work, academic, institutional, or whatever it may be, a kind of assistance. But that requires a kind of critical knowledge to be able to make the call of what is credible, what should be doubted, and have a critical assessment of that. So I think short answer is sort of the evolving technologies doesn't sort of reduce the need for us to be educated and be able to appraise what we get, you know.
I obviously appreciate that question. And I noted, Humbi, that you already embedded the sort of need for a larger context in part of your approach. But so both Humbi and Eric, do you find that the students are equipped to run with you in your advanced questions of them? And how do you bring them on board to be able to engage this material in your classes?
Sure. I think that my students, just, in the small selection of students I have within the huge population of GSD, they're already coming with some prior knowledge of AI tools, but also quite a bit of skepticism or a desire to deal with it in a pretty nuanced way. And so, I often find that when I'm giving them this sort of the lecture slides or engaging with them in this sort of questions, they're really amenable to it because they have also been seeing this sort of Instagram posts. They have also seen maybe like the first blush of exploration that felt a little like they were in the very early days full of potential, but then very soon it felt like it hit a wall and it was a little bit unsatisfactory. And I think a lot of students themselves felt these challenges and are really curious to explore this. And then to go back to some of the original question, I do think that um, there is a lot of like contextual knowledge or just sense of meaning making, like in the question regarding what humans are contributing. Um, and then also the fact that our discipline of design and architecture, out of necessity, you're making usually three-dimensional things or talking about three-dimensional things for other humans to use. And just by nature of that, technology can only process and understand things that are conveyable as data and or able to be written out. And so some things that are missing in that data set is, let's say, like tacit knowledge or knowledge that like you and I have gained through our experience being designers, touching things, making things. And that is really difficult to become part of the data set. And so, those kind of reveal different ways in which it seems obvious to me that like humans are not going to be disappearing from this process. In fact, they're the most crucial part.
I appreciate your optimism. Eric.
I would say that the students are as all over the place as Martin's survey was. I have students in my class that are, using Claude to write tools to figure out the Harvard Art Museum's APIs and make an index of how much blue is in different genres of painting. They're going nuts. And the other student is adamantly opposed to AI and made that as an assignment for how to deal with the Harvard art pigment collection. She went out and made her own pigments and brought them to class, and we painted with them. And that was like the biggest hit of the presentation. So for me, I'm willing to engage with it all over the place. And then I think the other thing I would just encourage us to recognize is that Kevin Kelly talks about this. He says that when humans can do it and machines can't, we call it intelligence. But when machines can do it, we call it machine learning. And this idea that he tells the story about when Garry Kasparov, who was the reigning chess champion, was beaten in chess, Deep Blue, I think it was called. He had a really tough year and went away and was really depressed, and everybody freaked out. But now Garry Kasparov runs these free-for-all chess sessions called where he invites centaurs in, and you can bring whatever you want. You can bring a team of 3 humans with 1 AI. You can have 1 human and 4 AIs. You can have a team that's made just of AIs playing together, and it's all over the place. It's very vibrant, it's very active, and there are many more chess grandmasters in the world now than when Garry Kasparov got beat by Deep Blue. So I think there is a potential. Technologies always freak us out, and I think there are places to find where the human is enhanced greatly by what's going on.
I think that's a really important reminder for all of us that, technology has always led to anxiety, that, we're going to be rendered irrelevant. Humbi, I'm going to put you on the spot as our youngest and our trifecta degree holder. Would you change the curriculum for students, the sort of required curriculum? In what way would you change it to take advantage of this new body of technology? Just a simple question.
Oh, yeah. What I really admire about GSD is actually the amazing plurality of approaches. And I do feel that that is pretty crucial. And so when I make my recommendation, I do want to keep in mind, like, I don't want me to be the only voice
Sure,
here.
of course. Yeah.
And so, maybe one addition I might make is in the early days. So, I did MArch 1, so I'm going to speak to that curriculum. So, early days of Course Studio, you get a boot camp, like crash course in using Rhino, things like that. And I do think there could be a bit more consideration about two things maybe, like one of the main emphasis I was saying in the talk was about how the tools are mediating the way you design without you fully realizing it. And I think in the very early days of a new technology, so right now we're talking about this because AI is relatively new and it hasn't become invisible through overuse, and therefore it's giving us the opportunity to talk about this. And so also the early days of the curriculum when they first get introduced, these tools are also really like rich moment for them to be thinking about this as well. And the second thing is, I think, in the long history of design computation, far before AI, there's always been this idea that, designers learn how to design, but designers also become workflow designers. And this is true in computation and also outside of computation, right? Like in Studio, you set up rules for yourself, and that your Studio project eventually becomes like a realization of those rules. Computation works the same way. And one thing AI is doing is it has kind of supercharged that process where anyone can vibe code and develop their own design workflow in a very custom way. But this is not something that's brand new. This has been happening for a long time, and there's a lot that we can draw upon from the previous discussions here.
I mean, I think it points to Philip's question in the Q&A about design craft and this sort of idea of, well, do we expand the definition of craft to, to offer credit or sort of to acknowledge that buddy who's on the side, the AI partner or technology partner generally. I mean, we've had technology, even the Rotring, I'm dating myself now, your Rotring pens was a form of technology, right? And obviously then computation and everything we've had since. And so, but some acknowledgement, I think, Eric, you pointed to that in saying that your students have to acknowledge how they're using the technology in their classes. Martin, do you find that that's something that poses any different challenge than it has in the past? I mean, you did a remarkable survey of different technologies across the school, and we can get to that. But I wonder just if that's something if AI introduces a different level of need for acknowledgement or differentiation of skill sets.
I've decided to embrace it fully in my current class, and I think what it does, it gets us to conceptual problems more quickly because the barrier for sort of technical things is lower. So actually, it makes the class more interesting. It also allows students who do or do not have sort of advanced technical skills to work together in a better way. So for me, right now, I see the upside of it. But that class, to be clear, doesn't involve producing. It's not a studio. Doesn't involve producing physical design. This is a class about organizations. So it's a little bit of an outlier at the GC, and and the students need to gather data. And it's so powerful what we can do now. Also, just not just gathering, but also formatting the data. So it's sort of fairly uninteresting stuff that would be super time consuming normally. It would take forever to get to an interesting point. So for me, it's been great to embrace it, and students are eager. Um, and I think what just reflecting on something what Humbi said, the kind of ability to create your own workflows, that actually translates also into practice. What used to be fairly cumbersome and basically not possible for smaller practices, we can actually do these things now, and it's pretty quick, you know. So my hope is that certain things will actually become easier in practice. Things that are just difficult and take a long time to do might just there might be some improvements there. There'll be challenges for sure. So
There's a thread in the questions that ties to that point, Martin, which is a thread about ethics. And I think it's partly Conway's question, but it's been bubbling through the Q&A for a couple questions at this point of simply ethics. And there's tools for optimization, which I think you all recognize and acknowledge. And then there's the question of ethics, which is partly authorship, but it's also I think, ethics more broadly. And I wonder, any one of the three of you, if you have insights into that challenge, or whether that's been part of your discussion with your students in your classes.
Well, that certainly has been regarding to maybe like the sense of authorship. To rewind briefly to the last question, actually. So in my class, maybe regarding embracing or not embracing the use of AI, I fully advocate exploration of AI in certain kind of media, like imagery, 3D models, etc. But have been very limiting with text, using large language models for text, because actually I have some deep concerns about concept generation or AI use, and this idea of design fixation that I was mentioning earlier, where if you just input random things, it can give you out something sensible, and then it's sort of like the student gets stuck in seeing that. And I have noticed that there are some students who use it much better than others, and what I've observed from them usually is they're coming to it with a much stronger, like more fully developed concept to begin with. And I really do think of writing as a process of thinking. So with that, I have been much more tight about like limiting the usage, whereas many other aspects of my courses obviously were fully engaged in exploring lots of generative AI tools. And so regarding ethics, like this kind of ties into it, because I would really like the students to feel a great degree of authorship. And there's a lot of there's some fascinating papers in CS World talking about the amount of learning that you get when you're learning with the generative AI tutor. And it really it depends on how much interest personally does that student have in the topic in the first place, how much investment do they have, and that hugely changes the amount that they learn. And so the trick is to get the sense of authorship, but also to be good students or good instructors. Like you really have to craft the initial steps in which they're approaching AI, I think.
So it ties a little bit to, or I want to tie it into two questions that Kevin Hines has asked. One being, they're both essentially about knowledge that kind of outpaces the faculty, whether it's the tools that are transforming so quickly that you can't stay on top of them as faculty, or whether you find that some of your students have outpaced you. And so I think all of you have referenced, there are some students who are more adept than others, or have more experience than others. And have you ever found yourselves to be put in the student's chair because your students are actually more advanced than you are?
For me,
honestly, that always happens in computation.
Yeah, that's sort of the game. They're significantly further along.
I agree. I mean, sorry, Eric, continue, please. I didn't interrupt.
Well, thank you. What I will say is there was one student in my course last year. There were actually two that had. I was nervous because it was my first class and I didn't know what would happen because they had a much higher level of computational awareness. They had taken courses. They knew how to deploy. They had taken courses at Harvard and knew how to program and all these things. And by the end of the class, they were asking, like, the students were like, "What do you mean deploy? Like, why would I bother doing that? It's just in the AI the whole time." So I think it was a great leveler. These tools were a great leveler of the people who came into it with a lot of knowledge and the people who came into it without. And I appreciated that more than anything. And I guess what I'd also say is that for the open project that we're doing, it's, for me, at least in this workshop, it's not about the finished product so much as it is about, or the quality of the finished product in terms of its professionalism, and more, my friend Annie Simpson, who's a doctorate at the GSD, talks about the conversational potential of these projects, that they're designed to get us talking and learning more than, at least in my course, more than about like a specific, solving a specific problem or meeting a specific need. It's about getting us thinking about data, archives, the world, knowledge, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good reminder that the whole point of school is that you're put into this great incubator with hundreds of other people who are really smart, and you get inspired and provoked and catalyzed, and you create things. So, but it has to happen in that collaboration and that exchange. Martin, what were you going to say?
No, I was just reminded in my current class, I have a college student. His major is computer science. There's no doubt that he knows way more about computation, coding, programming than probably most faculty. But there's a lot of things you can learn, because this is not a class where this actually matters. It's a class that deals with conceptual issues of organizations, and I think what I think a lot of coursework does is also sort of produce a moment of collaboration within the students, where we're also hoping they sort of learn from each other. And I think so. I welcome that kind of range of skills. Everybody brings something different, whether conceptual, technical background to the classroom. I think that's the beauty of the GC. We're such a melting pot of skills, background, worldviews. And I think that is why the place is so powerful and a little bit complicated now and then. But I love that complication. I think the trick is as a teacher to make that an asset and make it the most beautiful quality of the class. And I think that's really the key, with how does it become an asset and sort of something that you won't want to miss.
May I just respond and agree to something that
Absolutely.
Martin said, that this idea that you can do stuff that like even for small studios, that you can make things that you normally just wouldn't be able to make. Like, one of my students took like a huge section of MoMA's archive of graphic design materials and used machine learning to identify which fonts were being used in all of the posters and all of the book covers, and basically built a museum of fonts that just wouldn't have existed otherwise. Nobody would do that. And she did it, in a week. And it wasn't very good, and it broke after 4 or 5. But even just that she could hold it up and look at it and point at it and talk about it, to me was the great win of all of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, I think a lot of the questions are tied to pedagogy that we're getting in the Q&A. And I think it is sort of amazing to watch the transformations and what students can do that they couldn't do and we couldn't do even a few years ago. So, Oliver, your question about these tools essentially demystifying the traditional entry point to architecture, I think they do, just as all computational tools, or even if you think about it, a May line made it easier to draw a straight line, right? I mean, so tools have always started to equalize the entry point in some way. But the beauty of a design school is that people do come in. I'm reiterating what Martin was saying, that people come in with so many different backgrounds. They then take those tools and use them or add to them in different ways, and they learn from each other. And so in a funny way, I'm not sure that it's actually changed our approach to education. It does go back to this question of like, frankly, what tools would you recommend a student to know before they come into the GSD to get sort of their feet on the ground in a secure way? And I ask that of all three of you.
let me actually. I want to bring up some other thought, then I'll respond to that, Sarah,
Sure,
if I may.
absolutely.
I sort of what comes to mind with the seeing the sort of current moment is the sort of around 2000 when sort of numerically controlled tools were sort of making their inroad into the academy, right? Sort of CNC routers, laser cutters, that was all very exotic, and it ultimately did not affect the production of architecture as much. But at that point, we had very substantial discussions about design and what good design is and how we design. I think I see this current moment in a kind of a similar way, that it is a moment of possible disruption. I think those are great opportunities to reflect deeply on what we do, and I think that we're seeing this in the chat and in the Q&A, right? So there's some anxiety, there's some opportunity, but we should simply use that time to sort of deepen our engagement with what design does, how it's impacting society. That's really what we want to do, right? Is there a way that we can deepen that impact or broaden that impact? I think those are the important questions. I think we need to be relatively, let's say, relaxed on the kind of disciplinary challenges, but I think we need to sort of think about broadly what can we do in a variety of ways. What unique opportunities might there be to sort of expand our impact? So that's sort of a little bit of a
Mm-hmm.
distraction, I know, but maybe
No, it's not a distraction. I think that ultimately that remains the core desire of the school, is that you get students we expose students to different questions of design across our programs. We expose them to different tools and techniques and histories and contexts and issues, and then we push them to produce ideas and possibilities that will have an impact on making the world better. It's actually, that has never changed. I think that is ever more urgent today. But all three of you, because I think this is a valid anxiety we get with its admission season right now. What do you need to come into a design school? That's I think a panic that we see often.
I mean, I'd like to just tell a quick story about the early Stamen. I started the firm in 2001. We started building online maps and data visualizations and other things. And then in 2005, Google Earth came along. And we thought, that's it, we're dead. Like no more maps will ever be made by humans. And we're just, we're finished. I'm going to need to go into another line. And of course, the exact opposite is true, that there was a complete explosion in geospatial hacking, in open source tooling. It was a key that opened a door. It was not the wall. It was not like the moat, the drawbridge coming up and everybody was suddenly shut out of it. It was like, so I think for those that and it put a lot of cartographers out of business, and people don't draw as many handmade maps as there's of course there's a disruption, and I don't mean to make light of it. I mean, the other thing I wanted to say was if you listen to Ezra Klein last week, he was talking about how awful the internet is now, and like the nurses, there's this nursing app that you have to download in order to get a job as a nurse in America, and they tie your profile to your credit score, and like the lower your credit score, the lower you get paid, because the more desperate you are and you'll take the work. I mean, it's just awful. It's just like, so I'm not trying to be some like technological, like, whiz bang, everything's going to be fine. I just mean, I think the technology itself is something that is always disruptive and is always part of a landscape that's shifting, and has been, since the invention.
I think that, okay, since you were mentioning it's admission season and maybe students are asking, and potential incoming students are asking this question, I would really say it doesn't matter to me what technology you are showing in the portfolio, as long as if you just pick one, but you can show that you're thinking about it, or like your conceptual approach to it is really thoughtful, nuanced. That's so much more important to me. And honestly, that tool doesn't have to be even technology. It can be handheld tool, can be physical model making. But what's so much more important, what will get that student much farther in life, is the ability to think about it in a nuanced way. I really think that you can always learn new tools, and in school there will be so many opportunities TA workshop, things like that. Like that's not as important as the way you use them and think about them. And I especially want to highlight that because there's a phenomenon with technology where like more technology begets more technology and you feel like there's a rat race and something happens in which like you get trapped in that cycle and you start slightly losing values or some of the like ethics around like why are you making that thing in the first place?
Yeah.
And I really think that the most important thing is the nuanced thoughtfulness around using some of these rather than just knowing a lot of tools.
I think that's a really great answer. All three of you have given terrific answers. And I think, Randy, that should address part of your question in terms of, ultimately being a first-year architecture student is finding the tools that allow you to produce what you're thinking and what you're aiming at, and to hone your design brain, which is what you'll be doing while you're here. But, in terms of admissions, I always say we're looking for a brain, an eye, and a hand. And the hand now can be hand-drawn or can be technology produced, but it's always through the brain and the eye that hand is operating. And I think, Susan, to answer your question about how we credit AI when it generates ideas for a piece of writing or design, we have the policy we have at the school is that you have to acknowledge if you're using AI and how. And so it's an honor system. I think that's really how you have to operate in this world. But I think that what I love about all of the work that all three of you have shown is that you see essentially the variety of things that you can produce. And it's okay if technology is helping you with that. Acknowledging it is acknowledging how you're learning with these tools. And so it's not cheating. It is a different form of education. And part of our role is to teach the ethics of acknowledgement, authorship, boundaries, and collaboration. I mean, we've always had issues of collaboration, and the positive side of collaboration is part of what we do. So it's actually, if you can build that into the ethos of the students in the school, that's really what I see as a way moving forward. That answers or gets to David's question of, what's the atmosphere in the studios? And I have to say that the atmosphere is extraordinary. I think our students right now are very engaged. They're very collaborative. Famously, over the past few years, they've really helped each other out in thesis and been less cutthroat, or what they were famous for being, I guess. And I wonder if that was ever the case. I was not a student here at the GSD, but the atmosphere in the trays is quite collegial and convivial. And I think part of that is recognizing that it's, being in school right now is somewhat of a refuge from a very difficult world, but a place where you can learn how to make a difference in that difficult world and leave to do things that will help get us out of our difficulties. And so I think the students are aware of the urgencies of the moment, but they can also delight in the kind of time bubble they have at the school to learn these new things, learn from each other. And I think there's an amazing respect for faculty that we have something to offer them. Even if some of them may know more about these technologies than we do, they still believe that this is a place where they can learn and gain from it. And so it's a really amazing time at the school. I think that I encourage everyone on the call to pay attention to the recent announcement of the comeback, the reunion that we have at the end of September, to come and see for yourselves, because I think that seeing and engaging the students gives you the opportunity to feel the tenor of the school. Going to the most recent question, we have, believe it or not, we actually have a course. Another one of the open projects is looking at data centers and acknowledging that data centers are changing the landscape of the world, but also the energy costs of them. And so we have that, and then also the Center for Green Buildings and Cities that Martin showed with Ali Malkawi's work. looks at the data sensing of energy and ways of dealing with that. So it is very true that data is incredibly costly for energy. We are at time. I have to say that, so I think that what you should be taking away from this event is the extraordinary breadth of how technology is being used for design and pedagogy today at the GSD. Three extraordinary voices from many others, but three particularly amazing voices. And I really thank all three of you for taking the time and sharing the work of your students and your own research with us. I want to thank again the team here, the Development and Alumni Relations team, for bringing this to all of us and sort of guiding us forward. And I will leave everyone with some homework because this is a school. And so in the coming year at the GSD, what's one way that you hope our community will improve the connection between technology, design, and pedagogy or teaching? So if you all have additional ideas or want to build on this amazing discussion, please send those in. And who would they send them to? We're going to put that in the chat. But really, I have a great job, except that I don't have time to take these classes. Other than that, I have a great job of being surrounded by these people and by our students who are doing extraordinary work. And so I do have faith that the world is going to get better thanks to the kids who are going to come out of this place. We are going to have there in the chat where you can send. There we go. The alumni at GSD Harvard EDU. That's pretty clear. Thank you all, and happy Valentine's Day.